Hi, I'm Yamona Pierce, President and founder of the Hamilton Hood Foundation.
And I'm Patty Householder. I'm a family search consultant working with the genealogy for the Hamilton Hood Foundation on Pierce Chapel.
And our presentation today, titled Hidden But Not Forgotten, Preserving the Legacies of African American Cemeteries. And our outline is as follows. We'll start by looking at the significance of historical African American cemeteries, dive into Pierce Chapel African Cemetery, founded in 1827, Harris County, Midland, Georgia, as a case study, and then explore how our roadmap and emerging technologies help preserve these landscapes. So, why are African American cemeteries historically important? African American cemeteries are not simply burial grounds, they are sacred landscapes of freedom and faith, community archives written in the landscape, expressions of cultural memory connected to West African traditions, genealogical anchors for descendants, rare sites of resistance and humanity, and today they are endangered places that require urgent preservation. Building on the significance of African American cemeteries, we can also understand them as ancestral landscapes, places where history, culture, and memory live within the land itself. If you stand at the southernmost edge of Pierce Chapel African Cemetery, you'll see Flat Rock Creek. Its presence there is not accidental, it was intentional. In many enslaved communities, burial grounds were placed near water sources. There was a belief that the same waters that carried Africans to the New World could in death carry their spirits back home. Historian Meckel Sobel, in her book, Traveling On, The Slave Journey to an Afro-Baptist Faith, describes how enslaved African communities retained a spiritual cosmos, core values, and beliefs anchored in their African homeland that continued to guide their lives in America. At Pierce Chapel, those beliefs are expressed in the landscape itself. After emancipation, Pierce Chapel and Flat Rock Creek became a cultural gathering place for the African American community. Families returned here for fellowship, remembrance, and creek baptisms. Just as the waters of Flat Rock Creek symbolize a spiritual connection, the land surrounding it tells a deeper story, one that is written through artifacts, plants, and burial traditions that continue to reflect cultural memory and community. These ancestral landscapes also reveal how memory is preserved through the objects and plants our ancestors left behind. One of the most profound traditions is the placement of experience objects. We have a couple illustrated here on the screen. These personal belongings, items cherished in life and placed at the grave sites as creative expressions of remembrance and to accompany the loved one in the afterlife. These artifacts may include earthenware, pottery shards, tincture bottles, porcelain teacups, vases, dolls, bowls, and even farming tools. However, this tradition is not solitary to the American South. Similar burial practices appear across the African diaspora in the Caribbean, South America, West Africa, reflecting the shared cultural memory that endured despite displacement. Scholars such as Alexander Ives Bordelot and Meckel Sobel have documented how these offerings were far more simple than objects. They were symbols of humanity, remembrance, and cultural continuity. Our ancestors also marked their burial spaces with plants and flora, living tributes that carried deep cultural meaning. At Pierce Chapel, we have identified periwinkle, yucca, buttercups, but at some other cemeteries, you may also see gardenia and Paul's scarlet roses, cedar, and other trees. Some of these plants serve as important markers for researchers today. For example, periwinkle, which is also identified here on the screen, often signals the presence of hidden burial grounds. As we've seen, these ancestral landscapes are more than just land. They are a living expression of memory, culture, and resilience. Every object, plant, and grave marker tells a story of humanity and cultural heritage that deserves to be preserved. So you may be wondering, how do we ensure the stories and landscapes are preserved with dignity? At Pierce Chapel, our preservation work follows a holistic approach guided by 6 key pillars, which we have identified for you on the screen today. These pillars form the foundation of everything that we do, helping us preserve these rare cultural landmarks and maintain their stories and ensure they remain meaningful for future generations. Having shared our 6 pillars of preservation, you might wonder how we put them into action in today's world. At Pierce Chapel, our work combines traditional care with modern tools. By integrating emerging technologies, we are able to document, preserve, and interpret these landscapes more effectively, all while staying true to the principles of dignity, cultural continuity, and community connection that guide our work. Now I'll highlight just a couple that we have illustrated on the screen and how these methods have elevated and refined our preservation efforts. So in the first image that we have on this particular slide, you'll see an actual picture of Pierce Chapel African Cemetery. And within this picture, the landscape, you see pink flags. The pink flags were placed during an archaeological burial plot surface survey to identify the burials that were identified. On this particular slide, the cemetery landscape and architectural design plan was really a compilation of all of the other surveys that you saw on the previous slide, surveys on this slide, which also included the insight of the descendant community, and it rendered a comprehensive plan for sustainability and the future of Pierce Chapel African Cemetery.
Three consultants became involved with this project with Miss Pierce, researching the family histories of those known to be buried there. We used Ancestry, FamilySearch, and many other sources to find documents of those persons and met regularly to discuss what we found and where we would go afterwards. After that, the genealogical information was used to develop vignettes of those buried there with actors in period dress. Each year during Juneteenth, 2 to 3 persons were highlighted. Their lives, family history, including the social context in which they lived, to bring these persons to life. The tree was in Ancestry initially, but that's a paid subscription, and only somebody who had a paid subscription could access the tree. So the tree, with working with some missionaries from FamilySearch, we were able to add the tree to a place initially called genealogies. And this meant that people searching on FamilySearch, if they came across a name that was in the tree, they could go to that person. They could see the documentation that was done, but the tree could not be changed, which was important because of the extensive research that had been done. To date, 80 persons have been identified buried here, but there are over 500 graves. And in both trees, there are 1,500 people, and continued research and documentation on both trees are still being done. Oh,
Okay. This is a slide of the community engagement. It just shows you a couple of photographic illustrations, if you will, of some of the programming that we do or have done at Pierce Chapel African Cemetery. Sankofa, Remembering Forward, is just something personal to me. This is a West African spiritual proverb teaching at us and reminds us to go back and fetch it. By embracing our past, we find nourishment to transform our future. And the resources slide, acknowledgments. And if you have any questions, we are open to answer any questions.